All right, welcome everyone to this meeting for the Clark County Housing Options Study and Action Plan. I'm going to share my screen here so you can see our presentation. All right. Thanks to everyone who has turned off your cameras and muted yourselves for the time being until the discussion portion of our meeting. My name is Steve Faust with 3J Consulting. Our firm is leading the consultant work on this project. With me tonight are Jackie Camp, Jenna Kay, and Susan Ellinger from Clark County. All right. Well, the purpose of today's meeting is to review the draft recommendations for the Clark County Housing Options Study and Action Plan project. You can see from our agenda, we're happy to have you all with us this evening. Thank you for taking the time out of your schedules. We're going to start with a presentation to give you a project overview, some key findings from the research that we did early on in this project, and then present the draft recommendations that have come from this process. After that presentation is complete, we will break into small groups for discussion. We're going to try some fun interactive activities tonight to see if we can't enjoy ourselves while talking about housing policy. So hope you're ready to participate. And then we'll wrap up with next steps. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jackie to give you a little bit of information about the project.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Jackie Camp, and I'm a program manager with Clark County Community Planning, and I'd like to provide you a brief overview of the project. The purpose of the Housing Option Study and Action Plan is to understand our local housing challenges and identify opportunities to encourage the creation of additional housing types that are affordable to a variety of households. And this is within the unincorporated Vancouver urban growth area of the jurisdiction of the county. This could be done through the removal of regulatory barriers and/or implementation of other strategies. The project advisory group was appointed by council to provide input throughout the project and assist with developing recommendations for consideration by the public, then Planning Commission, and ultimately the County Council. The 18-member advisory group represents a variety of interest groups and stakeholders, including realtors and housing developers, affordable housing advocates, houseless advocates, aging and disability advocates, communities of color, representatives for schools, youth, and large employers, along with neighborhoods. They have been meeting all year to learn and understand the issues, and more recently, they have been developing and discussing potential strategies to overcome the local housing challenges in providing more housing types. Next slide. To understand those issues, the Housing Option Study project included the activities that you see listed on this slide, which included a stakeholder interview and focus group process, a housing inventory and analysis, and an audit of the county's land use, zoning, and regulations. Next slide. This slide shows the general project schedule, indicating the project's 5 major phases. The project is currently in phase 3, develop recommendations, which is, you can see here outlined in red. The advisory group has developed a list of strategies that have the potential in assisting in the effort of providing additional housing types in the study area. At this stage of the project, they are seeking input from the public on those strategies so that they can finalize their list of final strategies to be included in the action plan. For the next several weeks, the project team will be collecting the feedback received from this meeting, along with responses from the online questionnaire, comments received via email and mail, along with feedback received from during various other meetings with individuals and groups. Please know that project staff is available to meet with groups or individuals to discuss this project and strategies under consideration. Just reach out to us and we can try to schedule something with you. The project advisory group is scheduled to meet on January 25th to finalize the list of strategies. Once finalized, the action plan will be drafted, followed by the legislative process, which will include presentations and hearings before the County Planning Commission and County Council. At that point, staff will be seeking direction from our County Council upon review of the action plan on what strategies they would like to begin implementation work on. Staff will then begin that work to amend any county code regulations or other strategies that the council directs staff to begin implementation. So once that phase is in place and we are talking with council and getting direction from them during that legislative process, it's a key point for those in the public that want to advocate or inform council on what strategies are important to them. Before I pass it over to Steve, should we take any questions, Steve, or how would you like to handle any questions on process?
I think we'll just hold those questions until we get to our discussion time, and people can ask them at that time, or you can always put your questions in the chat and we'll answer them when we can. I'll also note that we will be sharing links and contact information later in the meeting, so you can contact Jackie or Jenna or Susan. You'll be able to link to the online questionnaire and find the project website if you don't already have that address.
Perfect. Thanks, Steve.
So Jackie, if you're done, we want to do some quick polls to see who is in the room with us tonight. And the first question, who's in the room with us tonight, and a little bit about your housing situation. So I'm going to launch this first question. You can see here our project area, the unincorporated Vancouver urban growth area. We'd like to know if you live inside that area, outside that area, or if you're unsure. I'll wait about 10 seconds here, and then we'll end the poll and see where people are coming from. Five seconds. All right, let's take a look. Can you all see this, the results? Great. So it looks like we have about 10 people who live inside the project area, and a little more than 10, a little more than half who live outside the project area. And we'll go to our next question. As soon as I figure out how to do that. There we go. The next question is, what type of home do you live in? And we have a series of choices here. So please take a minute to read through those and let us know what type of home you live in. Wait about 5 more seconds. All right, I'm going to share the results there. And you can see that most of our participants live in single-family detached homes, and we have a few people who live in apartments. You'll see that that is probably very reflective of our study area in just a moment when we go through our key findings. All right, question number 3. We want to know if you rent your home, or if you're a homeowner or a renter, or have another current housing situation. 5 seconds. All right. you can see that the majority, roughly reflective of single family detached homes versus apartments, that we have about 19 people who are homeowners and 4 people who are renters. We have one more question, excuse me, and that is, how long have you lived in your current home? We'll wait 5 seconds. Okay. This is a little bit more distributed, but you can see that the majority of our participants have been in their home for more than 10 years. But we also have 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 folks who have been in their homes for less than 10 years. So again, just to recap, we have a fair amount of people who own single family detached homes in the room, along with some renters, and split between more than 10 years and less than 10 years in terms of how long people have lived in their homes. All right, well, that was just an opportunity to learn a little bit about you all and what your current housing situation is. And now I'm going to present some of the key findings from the first phase of our project. Jackie had mentioned earlier that we did a lot of outreach to stakeholders through interviews. We conducted a study of demographics and housing data, and we did a close review of the county zoning policy development code. So some of our key findings, the first one that I want to note is that housing is getting increasingly expensive in our study area. Wage growth has been outpaced by increases in rents and in home sale prices. So you can see wages over the 2012 to 2019 period increased 12%, rents a little bit more at 23%, and average home sales per square foot 95%. So again, clearly housing is getting more expensive in our study area. Next up, single family owner occupied dwellings are the predominant housing type in the county, but they do not reflect the entirety of local needs. So you can see in the chart on the left that about 60% of households are either 1 or 2 person households. And then if you look at the chart on the right, you can see that about 60% 1 and 2 person households. And we look at size of home, we have about 70% of our housing stock is in 3 and 4 bedroom units. We've also noted through our outreach and research that impact and development fees are considered relatively high by our stakeholders. And it was noted that they're not scaled to support the development of housing types with smaller footprints. Next finding is that there is a relatively small supply of land for medium and high density housing, and that limits the variety of housing options that get built. So there are 3 comprehensive plan designations that are implemented by 15 zone districts. You can see over here, 89% of residential land is zoned for low density development. And if you look at buildable land, so the land that does not currently have housing on it, 84% is designated for low density. Next up, we note that the aging of baby boomers and the household formation of millennials will drive demand for renter and owner occupied housing of all sizes. And this is a really useful chart. I'm going to pause for a few minutes so you can take a look at it. But as an example, if your household earns 80% of median family income, that's about $70,300. That means that you can afford a rent of $1,760 or a house between $246,000 and $281,000. And I know homes of that sale price are hard to find. And that's a typical salary for a middle school teacher. And you can go down in income and up in income and see what the rents you can expect to pay and what the average housing prices are. All right. And then finally, in terms of needed housing units, over the next 15 years, Clark County is going to need about 13,300 housing units, some from current underproduction, and some based on future need to respond to growth. And in this chart on the right, we can see that a little more than 6,000 of those households are going to fall in the 120% or more of area median income percentage. And we know that the market is going to typically takes care of people in this income range. What the market does not take care of as well is folks in the 0 to 80% for sure, and even in the 80 to 120% AMI range. So that's some of what we're basing our recommendations on. With that, I'm going to move forward and go through some of the Housing Action Plan draft recommendations. And before we dive into that, first, I want to introduce the housing objectives that were developed by our project advisory group, based in part on the data, the key findings I just presented, as well as other information that we gathered throughout this project. So the first objective is to encourage, and these are in no order of importance, I should say, there's just 5 objectives. One is to encourage housing development that meets the needs of middle income households. The second focuses on developing housing that is affordable to low, very low, and extremely low low income households. We want to encourage a diversity in housing types and tenure, so both housing type as well as whether they're rental or ownership. We want to encourage the creation of a broad range of housing sizes to match the needs of our households, if you remember those 2 side-by-side charts earlier. And then we want to guide development of diverse housing options to areas with access to transportation corridors and transit, commercial services, schools, and parks. And conversely, we want to make sure that those amenities are available in areas where more housing is added. The project advisory group has met multiple times, 8 times in all, I believe, thus far. And they were tasked with starting with a large group of strategies, potential strategies, and really refining them to come up with a list that they felt is important for our study area in Clark County. There's 50 strategies in all that were developed to meet those objectives, at least for our draft recommendations. And we've divided those into 2 categories. The first is near-term strategies that are typically lower cost strategies that have high potential impacts. Also in this near-term category are low-hanging fruit strategies that are either very easy to implement or are required to comply with state or other legislation. So those are our near-term strategies. Long-term strategies are those which are with a little bit longer timelines that have good potential to help meet our objectives, but oftentimes require further study or fine-tuning of certain strategies that we know are not going to be able to be accomplished through our current project. But we want to make sure that they remain on a list for the county to consider and work on going forward. Tonight, for the most part, we're going to be focusing a little bit more on the near-term strategies, but we will mix in a few of the longer-term strategies as well. And going through those 50 strategies would take too much time and probably provide a little bit more detail than people are ready for this evening. But I want to direct people to this website here, clark.wa.gov/housing options. And there in the meeting materials for this meeting, You can find the complete list of strategies and a lot more information on all of these strategies. You'll also find a link to the online questionnaire, which I'll share towards the end of this meeting, that's going to allow you to comment on each and every one of those strategies. But we have the project advisory group, along with county staff and consultant team, have divided these strategies into 4 categories: housing options, support for affordable housing, programs and partnerships, and advocacy. And I'm going to walk through each of those categories briefly before we start our discussion. First, housing options. What we're trying to do through the housing option strategies is expand housing development options and enhance the feasibility of existing housing options. Some of our strategies include enhancing development feasibility of single-family detached homes to support home ownership opportunities, including smaller lot options. This includes strategies like reducing minimum lot sizes to allow smaller units, and increasing minimum densities in high density zones to support multifamily and smaller home options. Our second example is expanding development opportunities for what many people call middle housing, duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, and townhouses as smaller scale housing alternatives in residential neighborhoods. Some of the strategies that fall into this category include permitting middle housing types like those I just mentioned in low and medium density zones, and revising minimum parking requirements to accommodate middle housing. And our third strategy here is fine-tuning existing provisions to support accessory dwelling units and cottage cluster housing development. So looking at things like minimum densities, attached and detached configurations for cottage cluster housing, potentially reducing the required common space, looking at flexible parking configurations, and other similar measures. Some more examples of housing options include incentivizing higher density residential development in high density zones, including revisions to parking and open space requirements and a higher minimum density. So I mentioned that briefly before, raising minimum densities in high density zones so that we get more multifamily and smaller home options. We're looking at exploring opportunities to expand where recreational vehicles are permitted, potentially in some commercial zones where they're not currently permitted. And another example is adopting a visitability program to either incentivize or require more accessible housing to be built. Moving on to our next category, support for affordable housing. We're looking to increase the feasibility of subsidized affordable housing for low, very low, and extremely low income households. Some examples here are expanding development opportunities for affordable housing, such as hotel conversions and permitting affordable housing in commercial zones, potentially without a ground floor commercial component. We're looking to study tax increment financing and other funding tools to support affordable housing goals. And also studying reductions in development standard bonuses to make regulated affordable housing more feasible. An example of this is the state actually requires a density bonus be offered for affordable housing projects on land owned by religious organizations. Our next category, the third of 4 categories, is programs and partnerships. Strategies related to administering county programs or supporting or helping facilitate partner efforts to provide educational and/or financial assistance programs. So some of our strategies include continue to administer state and federal funds to support housing development. The county already receives and distributes federal funds through different programs to various community partners, and that will continue. We want to look at streamlining development and permitting review processes to reduce development review times and save lower costs. Provide educational materials and dedicated staff to help developers utilize affordable housing incentives. dedicated staff to help developers with those, understand and use those affordable housing incentives was one of our more popular strategies. Marketing resources to educate renters and homeowners about supportive programs and resources. And then fifth is monitoring housing development over time and providing updates to support further regulatory revisions. So really maintaining an inventory of housing and new housing and a lot of the data around that housing to help us make more educated decisions. Our final category is advocacy. And this is advocating for state legislative changes to allow strategies and tools that aren't currently available to the county. And I know that county council has already begun advocating for some of these things. Some examples include expanding multifamily tax, the multifamily tax exemption to include counties. Right now, it's only available to cities as a tool. And then fixing issues with the state's condominium defect liability law, which really prohibits the number of condominiums that get built, which could be a less expensive homeownership opportunity. Okay. Now we're going to move to the discussion portion of the meeting. We're going to break into two small groups to answer this question, based on the presentation we gave, and we will review the strategies again, so you don't have to have memorized them all. What do you like or not like about these strategies, about these different types of strategies? That's what we want to hear from you tonight. As I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, we're going to experiment a bit with an interactive exercise. So I assume that most people here at some point have been to a public meeting where there's big sheets of paper on the wall and you use sticky notes to give your comments on different proposals. So we're going to do the same thing tonight, but on a virtual board. So in a moment, I'll put a link in the chat that you can use to bring up this board and paste your own sticky notes. Your facilitator will review a category and then lead a discussion for about 10 minutes on each of those categories. And that will give you time to post sticky notes if you'd like to. You can also ask your facilitator to post a note on your behalf, or you can just put your comments in the chat. Any one of those things you can communicate in any one of those ways. And there's going to be 6 rounds of discussion over the next hour, like I said, about 10 minutes apiece. So when you see the screen, after I drop the link in the chat, which I'll do in just a second, on the left side of your screen, you'll see the sticky note icon. And if you want to paste a note, you'll click on that and it'll pull up a little sticky note box like this.
Where are you?
Oh. Folks, please put yourself on mute if you haven't done so. Thank you. It'll pop up a note like this. You type in what you want, you click save, and then you can move it around the screen. So that is our exercise. I'm going to go back to this discussion screen, and I'm going to grab our link and post it into the chat. I'll do that first. All right, is that posted in the chat for everyone? So I'll give you a minute. Hopefully that stays in the chat when we move to our meeting rooms, but that'll give you a minute to click on that and you'll be able to navigate the slides on the board independently, but your facilitator is going to lead your group through that, through the discussion process. So without further ado, I'm going to open our chat rooms and we'll convene back here in an hour or less, as long as there's no questions. Jackie or Susan or Jenna, are we ready to go?
I think so, Steve. Do you want to do color coordination or what for the stickies?
Nope.
Okay.
No,
just
I
go
think people
for
can
it.
choose whichever color they want.
All right, cool.
All right, here we go. Hi, I need to Give me just a moment. Susan, could you lead introductions? There's some people who were not, who weren't distributed to other rooms, so I need to move them to different rooms. So why don't we, could you lead our introductions, please?
Of course. I'll start myself. I'm Susan Ellinger, and I'm a planner with community planning. I'll just go around the screen. Laura, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, I'm Laura Ellsworth, and I am with Council for the Homeless.
Great, thanks for being here. Jackie.
I'm Jackie Lane, and I am on the Board of Friends of Clark County and also a member of the League, although I don't represent either one of them here, but both are interested.
Okay, thanks. I have Tyler.
Trying to find a light here. Yeah, tonight I'm just Tyler. I live in the county. By day, I'm the Homeless Assistance Resource Team Officer for the City of Vancouver.
Great, thank you. Glenn.
Glenn's on mute.
We can keep moving along. We'll
Okay.
get back to Glenn.
Kelsey.
Hey everybody, I'm an MSW intern down at Portland State, and I work at Council for the Homeless up in Vancouver. So I'm just kind of here to observe and just kind of see what's going on up there.
Great. Cheryl.
Hi, Cheryl Berkey. I'm a neighbor in the Target area.
Great, thanks for being here. Justin.
Hi there, Justin Wood, Government Affairs Coordinator for the Building Industry Association of Clark County.
All right. Curtis.
I'm here. I'm a realtor. I've been a realtor in Clark County for 22 years, and I'm here to discover what's coming down the pike or what ideas they have for affordable housing and what they're going to deem affordable housing in the future. And just excited to see what is going around. It looks like things are being tried around the county and stuff, to bring the cost of per unit down for a family. So I'm always more interested in what can be build equity and be resold as real estate more than big multifamily units and such.
Okay.
For overmuch.
Okay, thank you. Michael.
Hi, am I actually on?
Yes.
Okay, good. I'm Michael Lynch, and I'm most interested in how we can motivate the increase in organic affordable housing, which is a little different than genuine affordable housing using vouchers or subsidies and that sort of thing. And so I'm here more to listen and to learn than to critique or anything else. And I appreciate these discussions. Thank you.
All right, thanks. Siobhan.
Hi, I am a parent and business owner in the Target area, and I basically am just here to expand my knowledge and try to participate more in my community.
Great. And Jamie just joined us. Okay, we'll come back to Jamie. How about we have one person on the phone? Okay, we'll come back. Peter.
Hi, I live in the city. I'm retired. I'm interested in this process from two vantage points. One is affordable housing, and the other is climate issues. I'm on a representative to climate action planning for the city. And I think density is a big issue both in the city and outside of the the city. So I appreciate some of the proposals from that standpoint.
Okay, thanks. And Mark? Mark Magoria, did you want to introduce yourself?
He's working on the unmute. There we go.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was just not wanting to play for me. Thank you, Susan, for your patience. Thank you. Mark Majora, and I have a community development corporation called Americans Building Community. We focus on neighborhood revitalization in the Fort Plain Quarter, but I'm here specifically representing two organizations. I'm board chair for Faith Partners for Housing, and then also representing Vancouver City Neighborhood Associations. And I live just across the 500 bridge from the program boundary, so project boundary. Thank you.
Let's also thank Mark, because he's one of our project advisory group members and has been a very vocal contributor to that group. So thanks for the time you volunteered to that group, Mark.
Thanks, Steve.
Do we want to loop back to Glenn, see if he wants to introduce himself?
Yeah.
In the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And just a second here. There we go. Where is it? Okay. Look, you guys are already jumping ahead, so that's great. So those of you who pulled up it's called a Jamboard, but those of you who pulled it up will notice that you can go back and forth and at your own pace, but I'm going to lead you through this discussion, and while trying to keep track of everything else. Again, the question for everyone is, what do you like or not like about the recommended strategies? And let's just go through these. And I appreciate we're not going to be able to read all these, but we're going to present each of those categories again, and then we'll have a discussion. And also, again, post notes or post in the chat. Susan is going to be monitoring the chat, and if anyone wants something posted in a comment, please feel free to do so. And we're also recording. So if you recall, the first set of strategies that I presented was housing options, updates to the development code that expands options and enhances the feasibility of existing housing options. And a lot of these strategies get to, and I apologize, I'm not going to remember everyone's names off the top of my head, but to what someone said about the naturally occurring affordable housing rather than subsidized affordable housing, our middle housing, a lot of these strategies apply to that. And if folks, when you're not talking, if you could go on mute, that would be great. But then unmute yourself whenever you want to say something. So just to refresh everyone's memory, this included enhancing the feasibility of hopefully smaller lot options and homes by doing things like reducing minimum lot sizes and increasing minimum densities in high density zones. We're looking at expanding opportunities for middle housing by allowing these different housing types in low and medium density zones. And then fine-tuning existing provisions for accessory dwelling units and cottage cluster housing development, just to make it easier to develop those types of housing options as well. So I'll start by just opening it up. Again, go ahead and post notes if you want. So here's kind of, yeah, you're all ahead of the game here. Feel free to post notes, or if I welcome people to share some thoughts on these this category of strategies. What do you like and what do you not like as much? Anyone, feel free to jump right in. Whether you like the idea of single family, smaller lot zones, whether you look at middle housing types. Oh, Mark, go right ahead. Yeah, you can raise your hand too if you want.
Steve, I missed the instruction on putting a note in there, so I've got some things. But number one, I just want to reinforce the opportunity that each of these strategies that lead to middle housing and building housing capacity, both the diversity of housing as well as the opportunity for new production arms to be generated in the housing industry to help build and generate this capacity. And I've got some links I'd like to post in here. I'm trying to post the link or the little note I sent to you. So I'm not sure how I get these on there. I'm sorry. I missed that instruction.
Well, you can put them in the chat, except you're sending, I think people are sending a lot of messages directly to me. Make sure you're sending them to everyone. It'd be great if everyone could see comments.
We don't have that choice, Steve. We only have you and Susan as the options.
Ah, okay. Well, Susan, maybe you can copy and paste some of those notes onto the board that people have been sending. So we'll try that. And I'm gonna look at some, so we have a few questions here that I'm gonna try to answer or have Susan answer. One is, did the group consider inclusionary zoning? That was something that was discussed. And I think if you look at the complete list of strategies, there's something in there about encouraging or incentivizing inclusionary zoning. I think the group steered away from mandatory inclusionary zoning, if I recall. So that's an answer on that one.
Steve, I'd add some perspective to that.
Please do.
So part of the issue with inclusionary zoning is it actually constrains a couple of other opportunities that are even more, in some ways, advantageous. So when you go down that inclusionary zoning path, you have made some choices that may not be in congruence with the objectives. So that's what makes it so complicated. So it's not that they don't see merit in it, but it has some baggage with it or some constraints that are problematic.
Thanks, Mark. I see there's another question that says, don't we already have good ADU guidelines? And I think the answer is yes. However, we, in our review of the development code, we found some opportunities to refine some of the provisions a bit to make those ADUs even more feasible. Not my area of expertise. I don't know, Susan, if you remember specifically, or if you have anything to say specifically about what was proposed for ADUs. If not, that's okay too. I don't mean to put you on the spot.
I don't remember.
Okay.
Sorry.
I mentioned some of them earlier. It was things like, let me grab it here.
Well, while you're bringing that up, I would just say that it's a constantly moving target. So never think about locking in, but there are so many people doing new and innovative things that what we have today may be, easily improvable.
Yeah. I think it was looking at things like parking requirements and for cottages, like shared common space requirements. Go ahead, Susan.
And possibly reducing the standards for requiring conformance with or for the ADU to look like the existing home and the placement of the ADU.
Okay. I think I answered most of the questions. Hopefully people have had time to post their comments. This is working well. Thank you all for jumping in with your sticky notes. This is great. We'll have a lasting record. And I like that everyone hopefully can see all these different notes and read them yourselves. Are there any other comments that people want to make about these strategies verbally? Just raise your hand or unmute. I want people to feel comfortable with whatever mechanism suits you best.
So I have a dumb question, and I live in North County. So is there work going to be done to have these rules or whatever consistent with Vancouver, since it is their urban growth area boundary? I mean, because the assumption is eventually this will all be part of the city of Vancouver, correct?
I'm going to defer that question to Susan, and then Michael will get to you in just a moment.
So we've been talking to the city of Vancouver about their standards. We're actually going to a city council meeting on Monday to answer some questions that they have about the county's process. I'm not sure that everything will be completely consistent, but I think it is one thing that has come up recently, and so we are discussing it.
Michael, go right ahead.
I've unmuted myself.
Yes.
I see in the center column, expand opportunities, that we don't need more detached single-family homes unless they're attached to home buyer programs, specifically for lower income households. And I would argue that that's being discriminatory, and we need to be flexible in our housing solutions so that all incomes can be included, and so that we're also not creating housing complexes that only have lower income or higher income folks. And that's the danger of we want to solve a problem and we have great intentions, but we come up with poor solutions. So I think that I love having neighbors of mine that are renters. And I'm not in a gated neighborhood. Laura and I live down the street from one another. And I think that's very healthy to have people of all levels living in context with one another. So I wanted to add that let's not go down the road of segregating income levels.
Thanks, Michael. I appreciate that. And one of the things I said during our key findings was that chart, the last chart I showed, did show that we do need a number of homes for that 120% AMI plus. And we know that the market is most likely going to take care of those folks. So definitely our focus is on more middle income and lower income households. I'll get to Justin in just a second. I wanted to just comment, there's a note that says, not sure how allowing more of this type of housing provides housing for 80% AMI or less. I think that's correct. And if you recall, we have 5 different objectives. I think these strategies definitely lend themselves more to that 80 to 120% of AMI, but we do have a number of strategies that target household incomes below 80% AMI. Some of those are in our longer term strategies because they require a little bit more study in order to make sure you're getting incentives and other strategies calibrated correctly. But I think that's an astute comment, but just know that there are other strategies that are targeted more to more subsidized affordable housing. Justin, go ahead.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to piggyback on some of Michael's comments. Just in the building industry, it's something that we struggle because we do want to provide ownership opportunities for all members of the public. And as referenced earlier, given the condominium defect liability laws, we are in somewhat of a position where we do have to create a detached home generally of a smaller size. And I think looking at revising the cottage housing code is a great step in the right direction, reducing that open space requirement and maybe allowing for an attached garage. Speaking to some of our members, we can get similar density to what it would normally be like a carriage style development. And then just one more quick comment, because I don't want to take any more time since I'm familiar with the project, but on the rental side of things, we do have just quite frankly, an underproduction of housing. So if a duplex, triplex, or quadplex is allowed in the underlying base zone, maybe making that a type 1 land use decision and review, and kind of creating more opportunities for that where we're maintaining the character of the neighborhood, but also providing more rental opportunities. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Justin. And I know we're looking at that strategy as well. Mark, one more comment, and then we're going to need to move to the next category.
Great, thank you. So I just put a post on the chat, and I'm sure Susan will be bringing it up. It's an article from Strong Towns. And Strong Towns is an agent of the Congress for New Urbanism. What, you know, a lot of the conversation in these strategies are tied to specific activities. And what this article does is put this conversation on a more of a system scale for folks to think about, why are we building what we're building? Why do we have 86% of what we have? And why that is a constraint in terms of being a part of the solution. So this is a great article, just came out this week. It's an ebook, and it is about as detailed and clear as you can get about what we're facing from a system standpoint. So take a look at that. I'll put another link in there too at some other point. Thanks.
Thanks, Mark. We'll take Jamie's comment or question, and then we'll move on.
Thank you. Sorry, I didn't get to introduce myself earlier. I'm Jamie Spinelli, the Homeless Response Coordinator from the City of Vancouver, although I'm not representing the City of Vancouver tonight. But my, I guess, question or comment, I don't know where this would fit in what you have here, but I think that we should start considering building more SRO type housing for folks who are very, very low income. Because we got folks on disability who will never be able to afford rent in today's market. But I think particularly in the county, I think this would be helpful with all the space that they have. So.
Thanks, Jamie. And in just a few slides, we'll get to some of our strategies targeted to more subsidized affordable housing, or to support affordable housing. But just to wrap up on the housing options discussion, we had a few more strategies that we want just to remind you: incentivizing higher density residential development in high density zones. So making sure we don't get low density development in high density zones. That's one of the things we're looking at. Exploring where recreational vehicles are permitted, looking at some additional commercial zones where they're not currently permitted. And another example is adopting a visitability program to incentivize or require more accessible housing to be built. And I know I saw a sticky note on the previous page having to do with homes for people with disabilities. So those are three more examples. Looks like we have some scribbling along with some sticky notes here. Does anyone have any comments on these three strategies that they want to share verbally? Meanwhile, I'll kind of scan these sticky notes and see what I can find, or see if there's anything to answer here.
Well, and Steve, I just wanted to let everybody know I forgot to move forward in the slides. So I put some of the people's comments that were speaking on a previous slide. So I have your comments. They're just on the wrong slide. My apologies.
No problem. Okay. I see, have tiny homes been discussed as an option to provide temporary and transitional housing? Definitely. There was a lot of talk about tiny homes, kind of grouped in with discussion about ADUs. I remember that. Let's see here. So feel free to raise your hand, or Michael, go right ahead.
I just say that I just read through the Post-it notes, and I appreciate each and every one of them. I really do. High density does backfire when it doesn't have all the things to support it. And that's just a given, that if you don't have the amenities for people to practice their everyday lives in high density, it has major problems. RVs should not be forever homes. Absolutely correct. It's not a long-term strategy. So thank you for all these folks, and none of these are mine. I really appreciate them. Thank you.
Yep, and just a few thoughts to share here. We know, hopefully you all saw that one of our objectives was to make sure that housing is built near amenities, and amenities are added to areas with a lot of housing that maybe don't currently have them. So that's certainly one of our objectives. I don't know that, I think RV parks are a long-term strategy for some people. That is, and manufactured homes are a type of affordable housing that I think we need to consider. So for some people, I think it is a long-term strategy. What else do we see here? Again, feel free to raise your hand or chime in, but I appreciate your comments. Yeah, they're pretty consistent there. if everyone's good on this page, then we'll move on to the strategies to support affordable housing. If no one has anything else to add. All right, I don't see any hands up. Sorry. Okay, affordable strategies to support affordable housing. Again, some of these strategies are a little bit longer term, but one of the top things that we're doing is expanding development opportunities for affordable housing. SROs were mentioned earlier, and one of the things we want to make sure is there's no barriers to seeing hotel and motel conversions to affordable housing. We also want to look at permitting affordable housing in commercial zones, potentially without a requirement for ground floor commercial, which can be a real barrier for affordable housing providers. On some of these longer term strategies, studying tax increment financing and other funding tools as a way to support affordable housing goals. Tax increment financing from our economic consultant was a tool that was recommended. And then studying reductions and development standard bonuses to make regulated affordable housing more feasible. So just what kinds of incentives can the county provide to help affordable housing pencil out? So I'm going to move to the comment page, and feel free to raise your hand or unmute yourself and share any thoughts you have about these. Again, these are just examples. If you go to the project website, there is a list of 50 strategies. There's a lot of strategies in there, and we just don't have time to go through them all. But if any of these strategies appeal to you, or if you have other ideas on strategies, post a note, or please unmute yourself and comment. We are fortunate enough on our project advisory group to have a really diverse group of stakeholders. And some of them included folks from affordable housing developers and Vancouver Housing Authority and other just great representatives to help us craft our strategies for this category. Anyone with thoughts on strategies to support affordable housing?
Here we go. Steve?
Yeah, Mark.
So I've hit on this on a couple of times. Multifamily housing tax incentives are a wonderful tool, and we need to look at how we can apply that same concept to single family properties that are willing to build capacity on those single family properties. And if you were to run the numbers, you would see that just the generation of additional occupancy on there has a huge positive impact on the tax rolls in terms of the indirect effects of having that kind of density being generated. So I think that's a key thing that ought to be looked at. If we really want to mobilize the lion's share of property to become part of the solution, those are things that we bring density to single family dwelling property siting. So that's, I think, is really key. One incentive that there's a tax benefit by adding housing capacity, whether it be expanding capacity on an existing structure or adding to it.
Thanks, Mark. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this pops up in our advocacy category, because right now that tool is not available to counties, only cities, I believe.
You're correct, and that's why I wanted to make note of it here in the study incentives and fee reductions, because we got to think on a broader scale about what makes affordable housing more feasible. And if single family is the lion's share of the property holdings, we should be focusing a fair amount of attention on those opportunities.
Thank you, Mark. I see that Glenn is here. Glenn, you missed our introductions, but feel free to chime in if you have any comments to share, or you can go ahead and post sticky notes to the screen. That's the exercise we're doing today. I know Glenn's been an active viewer of our project advisory group meetings and commenter, and we appreciate his participation. I'll give just another few minutes because I see a few more notes popping up. I'm going to try to read through them. Yep, certainly, you know, when you put forth incentives, the county is going to need to make sure that that the requirements to benefit from those incentives are met. I think that's certainly something that needs to be done. Converting existing SFR to single-family residential to duplex or separate dwelling spaces. We'll take another look at, Susan, does that fall under, does the county's ADU provisions include home conversions? Yes. Okay. But as I mentioned earlier, we'll be taking a closer look at those provisions to make sure that ADUs are as feasible as possible. There's a question about how will affordable be defined or required. Do you have an answer to that, Susan? I know it got asked a lot in our group, and I think there's, basically HUD standards that the county would abide by when talking about different levels. We looked at 30, 60, 80% area median income. And I think that would be defined, for incentives, for instance, that would be defined on a incentive by incentive, when you create a new incentive, that affordability point would be defined, correct?
I think it would be, yes. We haven't decided on, a specific standard, but yes, I think we would want to do that.
Yeah, we've been asked to define affordable, and I think, it's defined by HUD, but for specific strategies, we haven't, we have to wait till we create the actual incentive to define that. And if you look at the full list of strategies that were developed, some of them contain some guidance on affordability and what those levels are, and some it's not defined yet. Jamie.
Whenever you are going to define that, is it possible to use our local area median income versus the regional? So I know that that's been an issue here when developers build these affordable units or affordable buildings based on area median income. That's based on like Vancouver, Portland, Hillsborough, and Portland and Hillsborough have a significantly higher AMI than Vancouver does. So they end up not being super affordable for people in Vancouver or Clark County, where they might for someone across the bridge.
Thanks, Jamie. That did come up in our project advisory group discussion. So I appreciate that, and I'll make sure that that works its way into our language so that we don't lose that. Glenn, welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I had a problem with audio. I right along with Jamie's question and what Mark had mentioned a few minutes ago about the multifamily tax exemption. I think that is an incredibly powerful tool that can be used, but it really needs to be treated as such. I cannot advise strongly enough to make sure that we have that reviewed very often to make sure that we're using it appropriately, because what can happen is different areas of in this case of the county, will develop quicker and will require more or less incentives to incentivize, to get that growth going. And areas will reach a point in time where you need to adjust that tool to be appropriate. For instance, there's some areas of the county that the multifamily tax exemption, all it would do would be able to facilitate development, right? Because I mean, the demand, it doesn't pencil out as it is currently. And so you'll be able to generate possibly some units with that tool. But there's also other areas of the county where if you're going to offer it, then you're going to need to ask for things in exchange. Like real affordable housing. And it goes right back to Jamie's conversation. We have to have that AMI message down. That's a real problem that we have in our cities. We keep bouncing back and forth between Portland's AMI and Vancouver's AMI, and you use one during this meeting and one during this meeting, and it's all confusing and people don't understand, and then they hear the word affordability, but it's really not affordable. So I just urge caution around the use of the multifamily tax exemption, that we really have good oversight over it and we're using it where needed and basically using it effectively.
Thanks, Glenn. I think that is a consistent comment on our Jamboard page here. We'll take Mark's comment in just a second, and then we'll move on to the next category. I see Peter mentioned affordability is usually defined as rent, no more than 30% of income. I think that's a pretty loose definition, and it's often referred to as rent rent-burdened households. I think we would stick more to area median income, and as people mentioned, applied specifically to the Vancouver area, not to the Portland metro area. So Mark, why don't you give your comment, then we'll move to the next topic.
Sure, and just real quickly, when we talk about affordability, obviously the commentary you've just heard shows just how complicated it can get and confusing, and it's unnecessary. The study has done a great job of articulating both the demand and the supply. And if you're going to put together strategies, you look at the demand and you look at the supply. And when you look at those numbers of housing that's being generated, it tells you very clearly what sort of housing is in high demand. Now, part of the problem is the economics don't play too well for generating. We've got an industry that's built and serving that single family big 6,000 number of housing units. And so we have to hand in hand with this create a workforce development strategy and a business development strategy that facilitates the generation of this kind of housing. So you need to think about it in that context rather than just slamming affordability. It comes down to where you stand and what you need. So use that as a structure for that.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate that, everybody. All right, our next category is programs and partnerships. These are strategies related to administrating county programs like development permitting, or where the county's role is to support or help facilitate partner efforts to provide educational or financial assistance programs. So I mentioned earlier that the county already receives funding and distributes state and federal funding, distributes that to its partners for various programs, something that the county intends to continue. Looking at streamlining development, streamlining the development permitting review process to try to save, kind of reduce timelines and save cost. We talked about having dedicated staff to help developers understand and use affordable housing incentives and to provide information to both developers and renters and homeowners about the resources that are available for them. And then finally, monitoring housing development over time. We learned that having good data is really important to making good policy. So monitoring development over time, including unit size, price points, location, all sorts of data so that we can make better policy decisions going forward. So, I don't know if people have as much to say about this one, but curious to hear if people want to chime in on anything. I just so everyone knows, some of these sticky notes are they may be from some of you, they may be from the other group as well. But this is the way we're capturing as many of these comments as possible. So again, you can raise your hand or unmute yourself. You can post comments in the chat, or you can go ahead and drop a sticky note onto the page. While people are considering if they have something. Susan, did you have anything to say?
Oh, just communicating with the other team. They
Okay.
are on about the same. They're just a little bit behind us.
Okay, great. I just noticed you were unmuted, so I didn't know if you were trying to say something.
Oh.
Peter, go right ahead.
Okay, I made this comment earlier, but I just wanted to add that part of the streamlining the development of the permitting process would be to coordinate, try to be as close as possible to the city's permitting processes so that developers don't have to do one thing for the county and a different thing for the city. It would reduce expenses if they could do the same thing everywhere they are in the area. And secondly, I know RMI has developed some apps for rapidly processing, in this case, solar permitting. But it seems to me that if we could do some computerized applications that would allow developers to get their permits quickly without having to make a trip into the county office, that would be helpful.
Thank you, Peter. I realized that one of the strategies that the PAG came up with that I forgot to mention during my presentation that several people highlighted was exploring options to increase access to neighborhood scale retail and service uses, within residential neighborhoods. So I might have mentioned that in our objectives, but I think this gets back to what we were talking about. Some people were talking about earlier in terms of if you're going to implement high density housing, making sure that those amenities come along with it, and vice versa. If there's areas that already have a lot of housing, see what you can do to introduce neighborhood scale commercial. Any other comments people have to share?
I would add that even though we're talking about housing, we need to talk about people being attracted to housing. And when we're attracted to housing, we have places to eat, places to shop, places to go around us that service our needs. And we really need to keep that as an important part of the conversation. And the example I would bring up is the parklets solutions that are being developed in places like San Francisco and to a certain extent in Vancouver, but to a very small extent, let's be realistic. But San Francisco is something I'm very familiar with and has offered a unique solution, although it's highly bureaucratic, to expanding options for places that people want to spend their time at. And that would be kind of outdoor safe places during the pandemic and things like that. And so I think in a summary, going back slide after slide after slide, being flexible towards things that increase the quality of life in Clark County are much more important than being flexible for developers' profits. But we need to combine those things so that we have the magic match, if you will, that finds a combination of those things so the developers are still attracted to us and yet they're increasing our quality of life.
Thank you, Michael. Appreciate that. Does anyone else have any comments they want to share before we move to our final category? And then we have one more wrap-up question. All right. I can find my cursor. All right, this was a little bit more limited in terms of the strategies, but we had a few advocacy items that people felt were very important. One has come up several times already, which is there is a multifamily tax exemption that's available to cities, but not available to counties. I think the county has been advocating for that to change. And the second is fixing issues with the state's condominium defect liability law. This is something we've heard about for a long time that has really prevented the development of condominiums in really the entire Portland region. We just had to fix the screen here. I'm not an expert on that, so I'm not going to try to elaborate on it. If someone else is, they certainly can. I don't know, Susan. I won't be able to speak to it accurately, but there's a question here about will the fix lead to a Surfside, Florida type disaster? The answer is no. It doesn't have to do with shortcuts or skirting regulations. It just has to do with basically litigation around condominiums. So Susan, did you have any, do you know any, are you able to speak to it better than I am? No? Okay.
I thought it was a problem that actually made them hard to finance for buyers. I don't remember the details either, but I do believe that was part of the issue.
Thanks, Jackie. And I think that's linked to the, when people are allowed to sue around issues with the units. And again, I'm not an expert, so I won't pretend to speak any further on that, but I'm going to call on Peter to see what he has to say.
Yeah, thanks. I'm not sure what the fix is. Typically, it is to protect the builders. And unfortunately, the buyers and consumers are already having problems with the defect liability law because a statute of limitations was imposed by the courts, which limits to, I think it's 4 or 6 years, the amount of time when an owner can sue for a defect. And unfortunately, some of the defects aren't discovered until much after that time. So I think you have to balance the buyer's interests with the builder's interests if we're going to do any fixes.
Thanks, Peter. And I think that's the goal here, because right now condominiums aren't getting built. Is there some sort of middle ground that allows them to get built but still allows protections for the consumer? I think that's spot on. Glenn?
Yeah, I would just add to that. I agree with Peter's statement there. There is a balance there. You can't swing the pendulum too far one direction, but I mean, we don't see condominiums being built at all, except for luxury. And then there's a reason for that. And it's tough. Being in the building industry, I mean, you offer, at least you should offer some form of a warranty, right? And it's a tough issue because yes, sometimes things come up that you can't see initially, but there should be they should be differentiating clearly between, negligence or fraud, that type of thing, versus things that just can happen sometimes. A defective product, the liability should fall on the manufacturer. You shouldn't be able to sue the engineer and the plumber and the electrician and everybody that was involved in the building of that project in order to do that. And that's kind of what's happening right now, and just makes the liability insurance so expensive, prohibitively expensive, to where it doesn't work.
Thanks, Glenn, for elaborating on that. I appreciate that. Michael?
Yeah, I've actually built a number of condominium projects, and I've tried to explore lower costs of doing it. And the cost difference between base materials and luxury materials it's almost evaporated today. It's really sad. And so the reality is that when we build new condominiums, and I'm not talking about renovations or retrofits or anything else, I'm talking about new development. It's very difficult to build for less than a luxury customer. And I'm not defending that. I'm just saying it's a reality. And we need to be real if we're going to have good housing policies. So how we overcome that, I don't know. But as a private developer, I do know it's challenging. It's really, really, really challenging. And we're finding this in, we're building some apartments for open house ministries to serve homeless people in an area of town that is about as low cost as you have in Vancouver, Washington. And those actual hard costs for these apartments are such that if we added $10,000, $15,000 to them, wouldn't take a lot. We could raise rents and not serve people who have suffered in homelessness. And that's not by our design. That's by the realities of today. So just to put some perspective on it.
I appreciate that, Michael. We have a little less than 10 minutes, so I'm going to call on Jackie, and then we're going to move to our next slides.
So I want to go back to the MFTEs, and my understanding is those exist more to increase density in urban core versus for affordability. And we've seen that they have not done anything for affordability in Vancouver. But, you know, the county's tax situation, because of actions by the county council, is not good. So to give tax breaks to people for a questionable outcome, I would say is maybe there needs to be a different legislative solution to that.
Thank you, Jackie. We'll do Glenn and then Mark, but we do need to keep moving here. Go ahead, Glenn.
Just really quick, there has been an evolution. The MFTE as defined by the state legislature has evolved over time, and it did originally start out specifically to increase density, but little by little as it's changed, it has been shifted towards affordability. And the most recent change that they passed in the state legislature, it's almost completely about affordability. That's the intent anyway.
And Glenn, I believe the strategy proposed by our project advisory group said, you know, if this happens, make sure to target it to whatever 80% of AMI or something along those lines. Mark, go ahead, then we're going to move on.
Yeah, just real quickly, right on the same line here. So Jackie, good point. There needs to be an accountability in terms of what kind of expanded capacity is being generated. So if it's serving a particular target market in the affordable housing arena that's low or very low, there ought to be a commensurate tax benefit. So if it's, and it needs to be monitored. So if somebody's going to serve people that are 0 to 30, they should get a big bonus out of that, because it's a huge payoff for the community in the long run.
Thanks, Mark. Well said. All right, here's our last slide. We have, I don't know, like 6 or 7 minutes left, and hopefully we're on track with the other group. Our last question is there anything that, you know, wasn't covered in our presentation? I realize, again, we have 50 strategies, so we couldn't go through them all. But if you have any ideas or you've seen things that have worked other places, now's the time to share those, so we can, you know, they might be included in those strategies, but they might not. So please share with us and we'll make sure that they are. Peter.
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. I agree with the little green thing that says climate resiliency. Recent studies have shown that building all electric is actually in the long term cheaper for the owner, and it's of course better for the environment. So if we can put some incentives in that are consistent with climate resilience and reducing climate change, things like you know, strong conservation, strong insulation, passive solar, even active solar, that kind of stuff is good for everybody in the long run.
All right, thank you very much. Let's go to Jamie and then Glenn.
I sent a message to Susan because I thought we were past it, but similar to the RV discussion that was a few slides back, in addition to expanding locations for RV parks to be, I think changing some of the restrictions that they have would also be helpful, because there are plenty of people who do want to live in their RV, who have older RVs that can't be on a lot because of their age. And so I think maybe laxing some of those restrictions somehow would be helpful as well.
Thanks, Jamie. And I know we did have some strategies around making sure people are aware of resources and regulations, but also the county looking into like further protections of people in RV and manufactured home parks. Glenn.
One of the things I may have mentioned once in the past, I don't recall for sure, but I think allowing more flexibility and creativity in the zoning rules, I think is instrumental. Like, for example, you know, instead of having a minimum lot size, have an average lot size. You know, you can have one smaller lot, you can have one bigger lot. That especially helps in smaller subdivisions that you do, because it gives you more flexible. Perhaps you can save that tree that's really beautiful and has to be cut down because you have to have a 5,000 square foot lot. You know, you can't have a 4,900. And then it also, you know, for sustainability purposes, it will create a much more potential for saving existing structures that are already there. So I just think that more flexibility in the size of lots, the parking requirements. If you're going to do a division where you have multiple lots that you're doing, let us have an average. Have some small mixed in with some big ones and some diversity.
Thanks, Glenn. And we certainly are going to welcome participation. Once we get a green light from County Council on which strategies they want us to move forward with, we're going to want participation from folks in helping us fine tune some of the code changes and in making sure to implement that flexibility. Mark.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to piggyback on the last comment there about, oh, darn it. I was thinking something else before you called on me. Doggone it, was what Glenn was talking about. Sorry about that.
No
I'm sitting here writing something and typing too. So
flexibility in the zoning code, I think, was the focus of Glenn's.
Yeah, it just escaped me all of a sudden. It disappeared. Sorry.
That's okay. Well, we just have like a few minutes left. Any other final comments before we go back and join the larger group? I want to thank everyone for your participation. I'm thrilled not only with our conversation, but with the notes that we've been able to populate in this this online tool we've used. I think it worked pretty well, and we'll have a good record going forward. So any last thoughts that people want to share, or strategies that people feel are missing from the recommendations that we gave an overview of tonight?
And Steve, I just wanted to let you know the other team just started this last slide.
Okay. Yeah, we can be comfortable. I think we'll let them, I think I have the power, to end the breakout group. So we'll give them a little bit of time here. And then, so let me see here. Yeah, I don't want to close the room. So if you have the option to leave, you can go ahead and do that, or we'll just wait here. Susan, why don't you let me know when, let's see here. These rooms end in 2 minutes, so I think we'll just let them expire. So if everyone's okay with that, we'll join the big group in 2 minutes, and then we just have a few more comments on next steps, and we'll wrap up for the evening. So thanks again for everyone's participation. This has been an excellent discussion.
Steve, can I add something?
Yeah.
So one of the things that I've advocated, and I think the timing is going to play out nicely, and there's an opportunity for this, but to look at doing some sort of a demonstration on, a couple of areas that look like they would be a good representation of how these policies might be applied. And the entities already have the authority to, approach something like that with the existing rules and do, a whole lot of options there. So there might be some great demonstration opportunities to show how some of these might work, both in terms of making it happen and the long run impacts that are available from that. So I just think that's a key piece about, you mentioned about post this study and how we might look at implementation.
Thank you very much, Mark. All right, we have about 45 seconds. If anyone has any last comments. Otherwise, when that time expires, we will move back to the full room and wrap up with next steps.
I got one last little thing. I was at the planning commission meeting, the city planning commission meeting, and they were talking about this, the city's version. One thing that Tim Schauer introduced was the idea of housing that some of them have no street access. That the only way to access is to walk to. And I think that's really something to look into.
Very interesting. Thanks for sharing that. Marcus asked if time is up. Well, I'll say Mark asked if we'll have access to this notes. We will publish a summary of the public meeting to the project website. I'm not sure exactly what it'll look like yet, but you'll definitely have access to the conversation from today's meeting, this group and the other group. Susan, do you know if they're ready to close out? Oh, you're on mute.
They were fine with the 2-minute. I sent that email when you said that.
Okay, I'm going to close the rooms and we'll see you all in just a moment here. All right. Well, I see. Oh, I think all the groups are back. So I hope that the group led by Jackie and Jenna had as rich a discussion as we did in our group. And thank you all for your thoughts and your comments. I think we're going to get a lot out of this discussion tonight. So we'll quickly wrap up here as it is 7:30. A reminder again that our timeline, we're here in this third phase, about to move into the phase 4, where we will be preparing the action plan and then moving to the legislative process and implementation. A few items for you. So here we are, December 14th at our public meeting. County staff is hosting additional meetings with interested groups. So if you know of an existing group that might want to have a similar discussion, you can contact Jackie or Jenna. Their contact information is on the project webpage. Again, that's this link down here below. Take a screenshot or type it if need be. We have an online questionnaire open right now, and it's going to be open through January 7th. This is the link, the SurveyMonkey link. But again, you can go to the project website and link to the questionnaire from the site to make that as easy as possible. And then our project advisory group, the 9th meeting of that group, and I think the final large group meeting is scheduled for January 25th at 3 p.m. If you stay tuned to the project website, we post the Zoom links for each of those meetings. Jackie, is there anything that you have to add before we close for the evening?
No, I just want to say thank you for everyone who participated tonight and trying out this new tool. I know we had fun, and it was fun watching all the notes and the comments come up, and had some good sharing and good discussion. So I enjoyed it, and I hope everyone did as well. And like Steve say, reach out to us if you want to talk more or if you have any questions. So thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good evening, and please stay involved with the project. We appreciate it. Good night.